What's up, guys? Yesterday was a nightmare. I had a car. I had a 2002 Ford Ranger, and it was in for a misfire issue. And I filmed. I filmed my whole diagnostic procedure for the car. But I had another car that I was diagnosing a coolant leak on. I had another car that was being dropped off, and going back and looking at looking at all the videos that I took, they weren't good videos. They were all kind of disorganized, and I wasn't happy with, the way the video came out. So I figured I would just show you guys kind of what happened on paper and make this a little bit more simplified than just putting a whole bunch of random videos together that honestly were just not good videos. So basically, I had a 2002 Ford Ranger come in. This car had, I don't know, a couple engines put in it. It had like over 250,000 miles. It was rough, but that's besides the point. So the car came in and it was having, the car wasn't running well. I didn't really know much about the car, and the owner said, could we do a tune-up? I said, sure, why not? Plugs, wires, air filter, and normal stuff. So we did that. I didn't know. I didn't really drive the car. I just did a tune-up on it. And then I turned the car on, it idled fine, and I sent it on its way. What happened was not 5 minutes later, a day later, the guy called me and said, oh, the car's running worse. And, I'm like, okay, well, I didn't really question him whether that was true or not, but I kind of got the inclination that, why did a 250,000 mile car come in for a tune-up? Obviously, there was some kind of issue with it. So anyway, I said, okay, bring it back over, and I let it run for a while, and what happened was I diagnosed a bad ignition coil. Put a new ignition coil in there, it ran fine. The guy's employee came, picked it up. 5 minutes later, car was misfiring on the same exact 2 cylinders. So basically, I said, okay, I don't know if this was already kind of like this or not. I kind of got the feeling that it was, but I'm not going to assume that. I said, okay, bring it back over. I need to do a full diagnosis now. This tune-up just turned into a whole other thing. So basically, what I'm showing you here is a wiring diagram that I printed out on the car. Basically, this is a waste spark system. So how it works is, okay, so this focus is the ignition coil. Sorry, this marker's rolling around. And it has 3 wires. Okay, so it's a 4-cylinder engine. So there's 4 ports, like I'm showing here, coming off. Sorry, this is not a great view of this wiring diagram, but I think you get the idea. There were 4 ports. There were 2 ports coming off coming off the ignition coil, and they both fired 2 cylinders at once. So basically, it's called a waste spark system. One spark fires when it's supposed to, and the other one fires on the exhaust stroke. You can Google or research how a waste spark system works, but it's pretty simple to understand. I'm not going to go into that here. But basically, we have this wire that was a constant power going to the ignition coil, and then we had 2 control wires coming from the ECU, when to fire each coil. Okay, so that's pretty much it. Now, here is a blown up version of what was going on. Okay, so basically what was happening was the car, so after I did the tune-up, the car was firing on these 2 cylinders. Again, I started up and it ran fine, but after a few minutes of driving it, it would act up, and it wasn't firing on cylinder 3 or cylinder 2. I tested for spark on both of these coils, and there was no spark. So I said, okay, there's no spark coming out of the coil. I did a little parts change, and I changed the ignition coil. Now, I should have tested wiring before, but it seemed pretty cut and dry. Anyway, I did put an ignition coil in it, and it did the same thing. So, okay, at this point, we have a known good ignition coil. We do have a known good ignition coil, and I said, okay, we have to figure out what's going on here. So, like I said, the only thing I did was plugs and wires. Now, I did take out the new plugs, and I tested them against the old plugs, and they were all within spec. They were all basically 5 ohms. The plugs were definitely good. I looked at them. They were identical to the, old plugs. The old plugs actually looked pretty good, but the plugs were definitely good. I mean, I put 4 plugs in it. These 2 plugs, were firing. Just, these are the spark plugs right here. These are the wires, as you can see, these are the coils coming off the ignition coil. Here's the plug wires, here's the plug. So you guys get the idea. And it was, again, with the new ignition coil, it was delivering, spark was being delivered to cylinders 1 and cylinders 4, but not 3 and 2. So at this point, I eliminated, basically the ignition coil was good. I put an ignition coil on it. The old coil was doing the same thing as the new one. So the ignition coil was good. I tested the plug wires. They were good. The plugs were good. So basically I said, okay, at this point, it's my dog barking in the background. He does that a lot. So at this point I said, okay, I got to test for wiring. At this point, it's either a wiring issue or it's an ECU issue. It really can't be anything else. So what I did was I did get the car to act up. So, I tested, there was a fuse. It's a 3-wire connector right here. This is the connector. I tested for power coming out of this fuse to the connector, and we had power. So that was, we had power, and I figured we had power because if we didn't have power going to the ignition coil, these 2 cylinders wouldn't be firing. None of the cylinders would be firing. The car wouldn't even turn on, obviously, because it wouldn't fire any of the coils. So we had power there, which I figured. So I said, okay, it's got to be this wire, so we have 1 wire coming out of the ECU that controls cylinders 1 and 4, and then we have another one coming out of the ECU that fire cylinders 2 and 3. Now this one was working, so I didn't even go to test this wire. I already knew this one was working. So I went and I tested this wire right here. So what I did was I back probed the ECU. This was pin 28 on the ECU. I back probed that. I back probed the connector at the coil, and there was continuity. I also did a visual check. I stripped back some of the, some of the loom, and the wire was fine. It was intact. So at this point I said, okay, the wire going to the ECU is fine. At this point, it's pretty much cut and dry. It's a bad ECU. I took the I took the harness off the ECU. I looked at all the pins. They were all fine. There was no corrosion, both on the ECU side and the harness side. And what was happening is it wasn't delivering spark from this wire. I did confirm that with the test light. Basically, you hook it up to ground, and this is supposed to be delivering a power, and it wasn't doing that. So I said, okay, this is 100% an ECU. The guy was like, questioning it and stuff like that. And I said, listen, this is 100% an ECU. I said, there's 5 components. Now, when you're talking to somebody that doesn't know about cars, you kind of have to try to simplify things as much as you can. You want to explain to the customer what's going on, and you want to try to get them to understand. So basically I said, listen, there's 5 components to this system. We have the plugs, we have the wires, we have the ignition coil, we have the wires going to the ECU, and we have the ECU itself. Literally 5 components. So the fact that these 2 cylinders weren't getting spark means that, okay, it's either the plugs, which it wasn't, it's either the wires, which it wasn't, it's either the ignition coil, which it wasn't, or it's a wire going to the ECU, which it wasn't, or it's the ECU itself, and it definitely was. So I explained this to him, and he kind of, I guess was a little upset. I didn't really get a great vibe from this whole thing. But I was confident in my diagnosis, and this is what I said to him. And he was, he came and again, this was kind of intermittent. Like basically, like when the car was cold, it would drive for a little bit, and then you could kind of drive it on 2 cylinders. The car was really, really, really rough. I mean, whoever put an inspection sticker on this car should be put in jail. I mean, I could go on and tell you 30 things why this car should not have passed inspection. But I mean, this car was the roughest car I've ever dealt with. But anyway, he's texting me and he's like, oh, my friend told me it could be a back pressure issue. My cats can be clogged. And he's texting me all day. And I'm like, I'm trying to just tell him, like, listen, this is an ECU. I'm 100% sure. Like, there's no question about it. So anyway, it's the next day. I got done all the cars in my garage, and now I'm just kind of relaxing. And, I wanted to just kind of go over, I tried to make a video of this, but it was really messy. I was just jumping back and forth between multiple cars. But this is how you would diagnose any a bad ECU when it comes to any component on a car. You're always going to have three parts to a component. You're going to have the component itself. You're going to have the wiring that goes to the component, and then you're going to have the ECU that controls when the component basically turns on and off. This is going to be, most things in your engine or any part of your car, really. So in this case, we had the component itself. We had the ignition coil. We had the plug wires coming off the ignition coil, and we had the plugs themselves. So that's three components. The fourth component was the wiring going to the ECU. The fifth component was the ECU. I determined it, and I tested this, that the plugs, the wires, the ignition coil, the wire going to the ECU were all good, and then I proved that the ECU was bad. So this is how you would diagnose any bad, any component on a car. You should definitely, check wiring and stuff like that before putting a part on a car, which I normally do. Sometimes I throw a part on a car if I'm pretty sure that's the case. And in this case, I did that and it wasn't the case. No big deal. Return the part. But this is how you would go about diagnosing any component on a car and how you would diagnose an ECU. Basically, again, you have three parts to every component on a car. You have the part itself, you have the wiring going to the component, to the part, and then you have the ECU. If the component, I keep on saying component, I don't know why I'm using that word. If the part is good, if the wiring is good, then it's basically an ECU at that point, and you can prove it's an ECU by going to the ECU, and that's what I did. So I figured this would be a better video, just kind of showing you, the wiring diagram, and then, giving you kind of an exploitive view of the wiring diagram here and what I did and how I determined it was the ECU. So, I thought this would be a better video than just, I did make a video and I uploaded it to my channel of, me going back and forth with the car, and it just came out, it wasn't well put together. So I figured this would be a much better video than that one. So I hope you guys enjoyed this. I just figured, like I said, I would go over exactly what happened. And this was the case. The owner's still not happy about it, but what are you going to do? I mean, it's not my fault the ECU is bad, but the ECU, definitely is the culprit. So hope you guys enjoyed, and I'll see you on the next video.